Today, we are going to discuss inefficiencies within the current rehabilitative system for domestic violence victims and some possible solutions. We know domestic violence is all about control, controlling the other person's actions, their feelings, behaviors, finances, and even their other personal relationships. The abuser gains control by using dominance. Of course, oftentimes economic abuse, controlling the family income, allowing or not allowing their victim to have any funds. And then, of course, there's isolation, controlling what their victim does, who they talk to, where they go, limiting their outside involvement. And they oftentimes use jealousy to justify these actions. They often will minimize, deny, and blame the victim for what has happened, or say that they caused it, a form of gaslighting. They use the children in many cases. They make the victim feel guilty about the children, use the children to relay messages to the victim, and then will oftentimes use the visitation and even exchanges. In many cases, abusers will even threaten to take the children away from the victim. They use coercion and threats, threaten to carry out, commit suicide on themselves, or if the victim leaves, talking the victim into dropping charges, and even making the victim do illegal things in some cases. They use intimidation. They can use looks and actions, gestures, breaking and destroying things to instill fear in their victim. And then they often use emotional abuse, calling names, playing mind games, humiliating their victim, and this usually leads to physical and sexual violence. This is the power and control wheel. It goes from in a circular motion from it would begin at the top and go right around. Begins with a little intimidation, and then, of course, it builds into, in the end, using coercion and threats to prevent the victim from feeling like it's safe to leave them, the abuser. So where do victims turn to for help? Well, first stop is usually domestic violence shelters and programs, police, and then the court system. Now, there's many issues with these domestic violence shelters and programs. They are facing a lack of funding. There's a reduction in federal and state fundings, and they're receiving many fewer private donations. There's a lack of resources. Funding cuts have led to a lack of resources. And then, of course, in most cases, they are simply unable to meet with the demand for services. 11,000 victims are turned away every day in the United States, simply because there isn't room for them in many of these shelters. They're struggling to keep their doors open. Issues with reporting to the police. Victims are afraid to report. They fear that the officer either won't believe them, or they face the fear of also being arrested. It's not uncommon for their abusive partner to lie, say that the victim hit them too, and so they have a real fear of also being arrested. And there's a lack of understanding on the part of police officers. They really need to be educated to understand why a victim will oftentimes downplay the violence. A victim is fearful. When a victim is facing the concept or the fact that the abuser can be released from jail, they fear what that abuser is going to come and do to them. There's a lack of support even within the court systems, the criminal system. Victims they're forced to repeatedly face their abusers. This can be another form of manipulation for them, further abuse. Prosecutors in criminal courts, they don't offer much support or protection. There are some court advocates and victim service programs, but those are not in every court, and they're really inefficient. They're not enough. Prosecutors, they lack the understanding to deal with fearful and uncooperative victims. There's a lack of coordination in courts with rehabilitative programs for victims. There's no real help in coordinating services with the court system. And then judges lack jurisdiction over victims. There are some victims that need to be ordered into treatment. They need help also. And judges should be able to have the power to order victims into treatment as well. There's a lack of support within the civil courts. A victim often lacks the funds Keep in mind that the abuser, in most cases, controls the financial situation. With all the cuts to legal aid, there's really no legal representation for victims in civil courts. And then judges in custody court, they usually don't take into account that the abuser beat the other parent. It's as long as they didn't hurt the child or children. They usually allow visitation and, in some cases, even custody. And then this is a continued form of abuse that abusers can use. They can keep dragging their victim into court. And there really needs to be more legal protection. Restraining orders don't prevent this. Funding is really at the heart of all these issues. We have to look at what can be done, and we need more federal and state funding. And this would enable domestic violence programs to raise awareness campaigns and promote more private donations, enable shelters to expand. Less victims would have to be turned away, and enable shelters to provide comprehensive services to rehabilitate victims and really help them to learn to be independent of their abuser. Funding would enable more complete domestic violence education for police departments and court system employees. It would allow the creation of more transitional housing programs. Most domestic violence shelters only allow a victim to stay usually up to 90 days. It would pay for comprehensive treatment programs that would include substance abuse and counseling, and allow the expansion of education and job placement programs, helping victims to achieve their independence. The system needs to be coordinated. Civil and criminal court systems, they need to work together and protect victims. Judges need the power to end civil court abuses, to say, we've already addressed this issue. I know what you're doing as a form of abuse to your victim, and I'm ending it now. Protection needs to be provided for victims, and testimony can be arranged where the victims don't have to see their abuser. They can still manipulate their victim into not telling the full truth in court. And then court systems need to be coordinated under a case management system that would help the victim to navigate available services and court protocol. There are better intervention programs currently in place, but these have really only had a moderate effect. It did show that participants within these courses, if they were there for 2 months or more, they were shown to be less likely to reassault their partners. But the current programs don't really address for substance and mental health problems, and most abusers have faced some form of trauma or abuse in their lives as well. We need coordinated services, case management approach for victims that would include an assigned case manager. They would help them assess the victim's needs and coordinate the services to address those needs. It needs to include safety preparation, emergency housing, mental health and substance abuse treatment, transitional housing, education, childcare, job placement, nutrition and health services, and then counseling programs to promote the victim's independence. And most importantly, there needs to be legal representation services, and these need to have no time limits as long as the victim needs to be independent and self-sufficient. Now, the cycle is ongoing for abuse, and part of this is because victims feel like they have to keep returning to their abuser. The prevention of this can be achieved by really offering full comprehensive services that promote independence and reprogramming of the victims. They've been through some trauma. They need help. Case managers can report to judges presiding over domestic violence cases and order victims into treatment. Courts would work with case managers to collect updates and the progress, and this would assure victims are receiving the services and funding that is needed. Convicted abusers should be required to help fund the rehabilitation of their victims. Just as convicted offenders are forced to pay restitution to repair damages caused to property, why can't abusers be forced to pay restitution to fix the damage they caused to their victims? And this system can easily be integrated into the already existing system of probation and restitution. Ending the cycle of abuse. This is what we want to achieve. So case management and court coordination systems will prevent the victim from feeling dumped by the system. Offering a full range of comprehensive services will lead the victim to complete independence. Expansion of safety intervention programs enforced with police cooperation and assistance, and this would need to include harsher penalties for violating restraining orders. Victims would then have less of a need to return to their abuser. They would have real full support. And I wanted to show a picture in the end of a happy family. This is the goal. This is the hope that these changes will help us achieve. Thank you.